By midday, a dense fog crept from the shore, swallowing the landscape in a ghostly embrace. Evelyn Hart stood at the edge of the camp, her breath misting in the cold air as she peered through the grey veil. The world beyond had dissolved into a uniform, indistinct greyness, as if reality itself had been drained of its colours and contours. "It's coming in fast," Marcus Lynn called out, his voice tentative as he emerged from the mist, his worn leather jacket damp with moisture. He squinted ahead, trying to discern shapes that might guide them back to base camp. Evelyn nodded, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawling along her spine. "Stay close, don't wander off." But the fog was an unyielding force, swallowing sound as greedily as it did sight. Conversations dwindled to murmurs, then to silence. Even footsteps seemed muted, their echoes absorbed into the thick air. The island had become a void where the normal rules no longer applied. Lena Carr moved cautiously, her pale hair damp against her forehead, whispering under her breath. Namar, Namar, the ancient word, lost to time but recovered from the island's silent language, was her anchor. She clutched a small notebook, its pages filled with the fragile hope that naming the unnameable could stave off forgetting. But even as she whispered, the fog swallowed her voice, leaving only a tentative hum that barely reached her own ears. Captain Jonas Reed's rugged figure loomed through the mist, his naval attire soaked through. "Evelyn, the men are getting restless. Visibility's down to a few feet. We need to pull back before someone gets lost." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the compass in her hand, its needle trembling erratically as if confused by the island's strange influence. "We can't retreat yet, not without more data. We need to understand what this fog is, what it's doing to us." Dr. Samuel Ortiz adjusted his glasses nervously, his thin frame rigid with tension. "It's psychological, Evelyn. Collective hallucination or mass hysteria induced by isolation and stress. We should prioritize safety over speculation." "Maybe," Evelyn said, but uncertainty lingered beneath her words. She felt it too, the creeping fog, not only around them but inside their minds. Memories fluttered like fragile moths, flickering and fading before they could be grasped. The camp was a tangled maze of tents and equipment, shadows blurred into obscurity by the fog's relentless advance. Myra, Chen, and Eli Turner kept close, their faces etched with quiet worry as they monitored instruments that now seemed useless. Nia Brooks clung to Lena's side, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. Suddenly, a muffled scream pierced the fog, distant and distorted. Evelyn's heart leaped. Marcus, he appeared moments later, breathless and pale. "I got turned round," he admitted, voice trembling. "The ground shifted door, maybe I just lost my bearings. I swear the trees moved." Evelyn reached out but hesitated, her fingers trembling. "We have to stay together. This fog, it's not natural. It's erasing us, bit by bit." Marcus swallowed hard. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I'm forgetting things, names, faces, even why we came here." The words hit Evelyn like a blow. She pulled her journal from her pack, the pages already cluttered with frantic notes and sketches. Lighting a lantern, she scribbled furiously, her handwriting jagged and uneven. Each word was a desperate attempt to tether herself to reality, to keep the island's silence at bay. Outside, the fog deepened, a living entity pressing in from all sides. The muffled sound of footsteps, whispered names, and half-remembered phrases floated in the air, only to be swallowed before they could be fully heard. Lena's voice rose in a fragile chant, the ancient language slipping from her lips like a prayer. She clutched a small carved token, a relic recovered from the island's forgotten past, as if it could ward off the erasure creeping into their minds. Evelyn's gaze met hers, a silent plea passing between them. "Hold on," she whispered, though even her own words sounded uncertain. Hours passed like this time, stretching and folding in on itself. The team's cohesion unraveled as confusion and fear took root. Dr. Ortiz's skepticism gave way to whispered doubts. Captain Reed's authoritative voice cracked as he struggled to maintain order. At one point, Evelyn found herself alone, the fog pressing in so close she could feel the damp chill on her skin. Her journal lay open on the ground, pages fluttering despite the still air. She knelt, trembling, and traced the words she had written, searching for a thread of clarity in the chaos. "I am Evelyn Hart," she murmured to herself, voice barely audible. "I am here, I remember." But even as she spoke, the memory felt fragile, slipping like sand through her fingers. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist, Lena, eyes wide and frantic. "The names," she whispered. "We must say them. Say them out loud, or we disappear." Evelyn nodded, rising unsteadily. "Then we speak. We name everything. The trees, the stones, the tides. We fight the silence with our voices." Together, they began to chant the names they knew, clinging to the fragile bonds of language and memory. The fog seemed to pulse with their words, a dark tide that ebbed and flowed with every syllable. But the island was patient. It waited in the silence that followed, a reminder that oblivion was never far behind. As night fell, Evelyn's lantern cast long shadows on the fog-choked ground. She looked to the horizon, where the faintest glimmer of light promised dawn and, perhaps, a fragile hope of escape. Yet, deep inside, she knew the island's silence was far from broken. The fog would return, and with it, the slow, terrifying erasure of all they were. And in that silence, even names would be forgotten. "Evelyn," Marcus said softly, stepping close in the dim light. "How do we keep from becoming ghosts?" She looked at him, eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "By remembering, by holding on to who we are, even when the island tries to steal it all away." But as the fog thickened once more, swallowing their voices and shadows alike, the answer felt as elusive as the island itself. But it was the names that followed, stolen beneath the tide's cold, merciless wash. Lena Carr felt it first, a shudder of loss that twisted her breath into a whispered plea as she sat cross-legged on the damp earth beside the campfire. "Marcus," she breathed, her voice a fragile thread in the thick stillness. The name felt slippery, as if it might unravel at any moment. Her pale fingers trembled as she traced the outline of the word in a worn notebook, scrawled hastily on pages that fluttered like the last remnants of a dying flame. Around her, the island exhaled its quiet hunger. The fog, thick and wet, pressed close, swallowing sound and light with a slow, relentless appetite. The usual chorus of waves and wind was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that gnawed at the edges of thought. Lena's heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against the silence that threatened to erase even its own presence. She looked up, catching Evelyn's sharp gaze across the firelight. Evelyn sat rigid, her dark hair pulled back, face etched with lines of exhaustion and resolve. She was muttering to herself, a litany of observations and names, the scientific terms that anchored her fragile grasp on reality. "Coordinates," Evelyn said aloud, voice hoarse but fierce. "The island doesn't exist on any map, but we have to map it ourselves. Every name, every landmark, it's the only way." Marcus stood nearby, his leather jacket hanging heavy on his shoulders despite the warmth of the fire. His usual bravado was cracked, replaced by a raw edge of fear. "If we lose our names," he said, voice rough, "what's left of us? just ghosts in this place. Lena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had spent hours whispering fragments of lost languages, piecing together syllables from the island's silent past. The words felt like fragile lifelines, anchors thrown into the abyss. "Naming slows it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "If we can name the island, its features, ourselves, maybe we can resist." Evelyn's eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Then we name everything. We speak it aloud, over and over. We fight the silence with sound." The group gathered closer, voices rising in fragile unison. They named the trees, the rocks, the strange plants that twisted unnaturally in the fog. They called out their own names, repeating them until the words cracked and frayed. But even as they spoke, the island pushed back a slow erasure that crept beneath the skin of memory. One by one, the edges of their identities frayed. Marcus stumbled mid-sentence, eyes wide with panic as the sound of his own name slipped away. What's my name?" he gasped, grasping at the empty air. Evelyn grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You're Marcus," she said, voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "You're still here." But the reassurance rang hollow. The island's power was not just to silence sound, but to hollow out existence itself. In the encroaching twilight, Lena knelt by a pool of black water, its surface mirror still and cold. She stared down at her reflection, the pale face framed by light hair, eyes wide and haunted. "Lena," she whispered, willing the name to stick, to root her here. The water rippled faintly, distorting her image. For a moment, the name felt as fragile as a shell tossed by the tides soon to be swallowed whole. Captain Jonas Reed paced near the edge of the camp, his weather-beaten face shadowed by the fog. His steady presence had been a bulwark against chaos, but even he seemed fraying at the edges. "This island is a trap," he muttered, voice low and grim. "It doesn't want us here." Evelyn approached, her gaze steady despite the turmoil inside. "Then we fight it," she said. "With everything we have left." The night deepened, the fog curling inward like a living shroud. Voices grew faint, names trailing off into silence. The island's erasure was absolute, a creeping tide that washed away not just memory but the very essence of being. Yet amidst the fading echoes, Lena's whispered words lingered, a fragile defiance against oblivion. "We are still here," she breathed. "We are still named." But the island answered only with silence, and the forgotten names drifted like salt on the wind, lost forever beneath the tide. The remnants of the camp lay scattered, a fragile testament to a team fraying at the edges. Evelyn stood stiffly near the central clearing, her dark hair pulled tight back from her sharp features, eyes burning with a mixture of exhaustion and mounting dread. Across from her, Marcus paced with restless energy, the worn leather of his jacket creaking as he moved, his short-cropped hair damp with sweat. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the distant lapping of unnatural tides against the shore. Evelyn's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "Marcus, this reckless exploration is tearing us apart. You're pushing us deeper into danger without regard for the consequences." Marcus's eyes flickered with defiance, his tone sharp and raw. "And standing still is safer, waiting to be swallowed by this place. I'm trying to map it, to understand it before it erases us completely." "You want caution, but that's paralysis." "It's not caution, it's survival," Evelyn shot back, stepping closer, her voice low but fierce. "Your bravado won't save anyone here. We're losing ourselves, our memories, our names. If you keep pushing, we'll lose everything." The argument spiraled quickly, voices rising, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Tensions that had simmered for days erupted, exposing raw wounds beneath professional facades. Marcus accused Evelyn of clinging to control, haunted by her past failures, while Evelyn countered that Marcus's impulsiveness was a death sentence. Nearby, Lena retreated silently into the shadows at the edge of the trees, her pale face hidden beneath strands of light hair. Her lips moved in a barely audible whisper, threading together fragments of lost words she'd pieced from the island's silence. Naming the unnameable had become her fragile lifeline, a way to anchor herself against the creeping forgetfulness. Captain Jonas Reed stood apart from the storm, his rugged, weather-beaten face stoic as he surveyed the fracturing team. His naval attire was worn and smeared with dirt, but his posture remained disciplined. He understood the futility of the argument, but knew that without order, they would all fall into chaos. "Enough," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need to work together, or none of us leave this island." Dr. Samuel Ortiz, the team psychologist, removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes, the thin frames trembling in his grasp. His skepticism, once a bulwark against superstition, was crumbling under the island's relentless assault on sanity. "We're unraveling," he muttered, voice hollow. "This place, it's not just erasing memories, it's erasing us." Evelyn's gaze shifted from Marcus to Ortiz, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. The island's tidal terror was no longer just a physical threat, was a psychological abyss pulling them under. The blame and guilt swirling between her and Marcus were symptoms of a deeper fracture, one that threatened to consume them all. Marcus's jaw clenched, eyes darkening with a mix of fear and defiance. "We can't let it win. We have to fight it together. Fight." Evelyn's voice broke, the years of trauma and loss surfacing in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I lost my mentor to something like this. I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. But we're losing more than just people. We're losing ourselves." The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the clearing as if the island itself leaned in to listen. Words hung heavy in the air, a fragile truce forming amid the ruins of trust. Yet beneath it all, the creeping silence persisted on, invisible tide eroding their minds, their bonds, their very existence. As night fell and the island's dark breath deepened, Evelyn and Marcus stood at a crossroads. Their conflict was no longer just between two scientists, but a battle for the soul of the team. A desperate struggle to hold on to identity when everything was slipping away. Outside the clearing, Lena's whispering grew softer, a litany against oblivion. Captain Reed's steady presence remained a beacon, though even he could not deny the island's relentless pull. Dr. Ortiz's eyes closed briefly, the thin line between sanity and madness razor thin. In this breaking point, the island's true terror revealed itself, not just as a place of vanishing land and forgotten names, but as a force that could unravel the very fabric of human connection. As Evelyn and Marcus faced each other once more, the question lingered in the cold air. Could they overcome their fractures, or would the island claim them all in silence? And somewhere beneath the tides, the island waited, patient and inevitable, as the erasure continued. The whispers had grown louder in recent hours, indistinct murmurs that the others could barely hear, but that Lena had begun to decipher in fits and starts. She pressed her lips close to the earth, her breath mingling with the mist as she muttered fragments of an ancient tongue, words that felt simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. "Listen," Lena urged, her voice barely a whisper but brimming with urgency. "These are not just sounds, they're remnants. Pieces of voices long swallowed by the tide." Evelyn stood nearby, her sharp eyes scanning the shifting fog that curled like smoke around their camp. The island had always been a paradox, an entity as much as a place, existing just beyond the grasp of understanding. Tonight, that truth seemed to crystallize with terrifying clarity. "What do they say?" Evelyn asked, stepping closer, the weight of leadership pressing down on her weary shoulders. Lena's fingers trembled as she spoke. "They speak of erasure and preservation. This island, it is a repository, a silent vault of all that has been forgotten. Names, histories, lives, everything washed away by the tide of oblivion, but it preserves them in the silence. It is both destroyer and guardian." Marcus shifted uneasily, his leather jacket rustling as he paced. "So it's like a tomb, a place that buries everything it touches." "Not just a tomb," Lena replied. "A memory, too. But one that demands we forget to exist." The words hung heavy in the mist. Captain Jonas Reed, standing apart near the shoreline, stared out into the dark waters, his face carved by years at sea. The tide whispered secrets only he seemed to hear. "A silent sentinel," he murmured, "watching over things better left forgotten." Suddenly, the whispers swelled into a chorus, spectral voices rising and falling like the ocean itself. The team instinctively drew closer, the island's silence pressing in like a living thing. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of their predicament. The island did not merely erase their memories, demanded obliteration to maintain its own existence. "We can't just run from this," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We have to understand it. If we can name it, grasp its nature, maybe we can find a way to resist." Lena nodded, eyes wide but resolute. "Naming is power here. Each forgotten word we speak slows the tide, anchors us. But the island fights back. It doesn't want to be remembered." Marcus swallowed hard, the flickering shadows of lost memories clouding his gaze. "What happens if we fail?" The silence answered with a cold gust that swept through the camp, snuffing out the faint glow of their lanterns. In that moment, the island's dual nature was undeniable, a guardian of forgotten histories, but a merciless force demanding oblivion. The team stood at the edge of a precipice, caught between the terror of erasure and the slim hope of survival through memory and language. The island whispered still, its voice a chilling reminder of what was at stake, their very existence, poised on the knife's edge of forgetting. As the night deepened, Evelyn steeled herself. The battle was no longer just scientific inquiry. It was a fight for identity, for the right to be remembered. "We hold on," she declared. "By names, by stories, by every shard of memory we can grasp. We fight the silence with our voices." And in the gathering dark, their whispers rose a fragile defiance against the tide of oblivion. Lena's hands moved deftly over the scattered relics they had uncovered days earlier, fragments of pottery etched with symbols that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. She traced the lines carefully, her lips forming the lost syllables that had once given these shards meaning. "These aren't just artifacts," she said softly. "They're echoes, imprints of lives consumed by the island. Each one a story swallowed by time." Evelyn approached, the weight of her past failures a silent companion. Her mentor's disappearance haunted her still, a ghost woven into the fabric of this island's mysteries. Yet here, faced with the island's sentient erasure, she felt the faint stirrings of purpose rekindled. "Then we must speak their names," Evelyn said. "Bring them back, even if only for a moment." The others gathered, voices low but resolute. One by one, they named the vanished landmarks, the forgotten peoples, the lost histories. The island seemed to pulse in response. The oppressive silence, momentarily lifting as if acknowledging their plea. But the reprieve was fragile. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, spectral silhouettes that whispered warnings in tongues older than time. The island was listening, and it was not pleased. Marcus clenched his fists, the terror of oblivion tightening its grip. "We're not just fighting the island," he muttered. "We're fighting the silence inside ourselves." Captain Reed's steady presence was a bomb, but even he could not mask the growing dread. The ocean tide crept closer, a reminder that the island's erasure was relentless and inevitable. As dawn threatened the horizon, the team faced a grim truth. To survive was to remember, to speak, to name, but every word risked drawing them deeper into the island's consuming silence. The whispers promised secrets, but demanded a terrible price. And so, beneath the waning stars and the ever-hushing tide, they prepared for the choice that would define their fate, a choice between fading into oblivion or standing defiant, voices raised against the salt and the silence. The island waited, patient and eternal, as the whispers of oblivion curled around them once more.